Picture this, a grand medieval hall, its towering stone walls echoing with the nervous murmurs of nobles. Tensions are high. Two rival lords, fingers twitching near their daggers, exchange glares that could ignite the tapestries. The air is thick with the scent of spiced wine and unspoken threats. Then, with a jingle of bells and a flash of motley fabric, the court jester leaps into the center of the room. His voice, sharp as a blade but wrapped in laughter, lands a joke so perfectly timed that the entire court erupts in guffaws. The lords, caught off guard, loosen their grips on their weapons. The crisis is averted not by swords or diplomacy, but by the cunning wit of a fool in a floppy hat. This wasn't just entertainment, it was survival. In the treacherous courts of medieval Europe, jesters were more than mere clowns. They were master strategists who wielded humor like a hidden dagger, cutting through tension, exposing truths, and even swaying the fates of kingdoms. While knights brandished steel, these fools fought with puns, satire, and the audacity to say what no one else dared. But how did laughter become such a potent weapon? How did these so-called fools navigate the deadly game of royal politics, where one wrong word could mean a trip to the dungeon, or worse? That's the story we're unraveling today. From coded jokes that mocked tyrants to sly performances that saved lives, we'll dive into the secret confessions of history's most daring jesters. You'll discover how they used humor as armor, turning the court's laughter into a shield against treachery. Were they truly fools or the smartest people in the room? The answer might surprise you. So settle in, because this isn't just a tale of medieval antics. It's a masterclass in how wit, when sharpened to a point, can outmaneuver even the most dangerous power plays. Let's step into the jester's shoes and see the world through their mischievous, brilliant eyes. To understand the jester's power, you have to grasp the razor's edge they walked every day. In a world where insulting a king could cost you your head, jesters held a bizarre privilege. They could mock the mighty to their faces and live to joke another day. That wasn't just luck, it was by design. Their motley costumes weren't just for show. Those mismatched colors and jingling bells were like armor, signaling their role as the court-sanctioned truth-tellers. Kings and queens kept them close not just for laughs, but because a clever jester was the closest thing to a mirror in a palace full of flatterers. Take Triboulet, the legendary fool of French King Francis I. When the monarch bragged about his hunting skills, Triboulet shot back, "Sire, the animals must be terribly grateful you only hunt them in season." The court gasped, but the king laughed. Why? Because beneath the insult was a truth. Even royals needed reminding they weren't gods. That was the jester's true job, to slice through pretense with a joke so sharp it drew blood, yet so funny the victim asked for another. But immunity had limits. Will Sommers, Henry VIII's favorite fool, once quipped that the king's new mistress had a face like a horse. Henry, famously thin-skinned, nearly had him executed until Sommers added, "And like a horse, she carries your majesty splendidly." The laughter saved his life, but the lesson was clear. A jester's safety hung on his ability to pivot from offense to flattery in a heartbeat. This tightrope act shaped their comedy into something brilliant and dangerous. They mastered the art of the coded joke, wrapping criticism in allegories or rhyming couplets that let them plead, "But sire, I only meant it in jest." If tempers flared, their humor was a dance. One misstep and the floor dropped away. Yet when done right, a well-timed jest could do what armies and diplomats couldn't. humble tyrants, diffuse wars, and whisper truths too dangerous for anyone else to speak aloud. The jester's greatest weapon wasn't just wit, it was the illusion of harmlessness. By wrapping their barbs in layers of self-mockery, they turned their own image as bumbling fools into the perfect cover for social commentary. Picture a jester tripping over his own feet, spilling wine while exclaiming, "Oh dear, I'm as clumsy with cups as the tax collector is with our coins." The nobles roar with laughter, but the sting lingers, that clumsy act calculated, every exaggerated pratfall and wide-eyed, "who me" glance gave them plausible deniability while exposing corruption. Take the case of Roland the Farter, an English court jester whose very name invited ridicule. He'd perform outrageous flatulence tricks to amuse the court, but between gags he'd quip things like, "Even my winds blow more honestly than the sheriff's taxes." The nobles howled, too busy laughing at the vulgarity to notice they were also laughing at themselves. Roland mastered the art of playing the idiot while smuggling truths into the room like contraband. Some jesters took this further, using props to drive their points home. One unnamed fool in the Spanish court would juggle coins while rambling loudly about how money just slips through your fingers these days. As gold pieces scattered across the floor, he'd scramble after them, wailing about greed, all while noblemen uncomfortably adjusted their jeweled rings. The message was clear, but the jester's wide-eyed innocence made it impossible to punish him without looking guilty. This delicate dance between comedy and critique relied on a simple psychological trick. People let their guard down around those they consider beneath them. A jester's exaggerated stupidity was like a Trojan horse once inside the walls of royal privilege. The real attack could begin. Their jokes about foolish policies or silly wars allowed them to voice what advisors whispered behind closed doors. And because the delivery was wrapped in buffoonery, even the most thin-skinned ruler would often laugh rather than lash out. The moment a king paused to consider whether he'd just been insulted, the jester was already rolling on the floor, bell-covered hat askew, leaving everyone wondering, was that a brilliant satire or just another mindless gag? That uncertainty was their shield. While poets risked imprisonment for sedition and advisors faced execution for dissent, the jester's laughter echoed safely through the halls of power, carrying truths disguised as nonsense. The most brilliant jesters knew that blunt criticism got you beheaded, so they became masters of disguise, turning their jokes into elaborate puzzles only the sharpest minds could solve. Imagine a jester twirling before the court, singing what sounded like a childish nursery rhyme. The lion roared and showed his might, chased the hare from morn till night, but when the snow began to fall, the lion found no hare at all. The nobles tittered, the king smirked until someone realized the lion was the monarch himself, the hare a rival kingdom he'd failed to conquer, and the snow the empty treasury drained by his pointless war. What seemed like silly verse was actually a scathing critique, wrapped in enough layers to give the jester plausible deniability. This was satire with a safety net. While slapstick antics like pretending to battle a broomstick dragon earned easy laughs, the real power lay in covert humor that required the audience's complicity. A jester might pantomime a fisherman struggling to reel in a tiny minnow while glaring pointedly at the chancellor known for embezzling taxes. The crowd's knowing laughter did half the work, turning the performance into a collaborative act of rebellion. Props became their silent accomplices. One daring fool in the court of Burgundy presented his duke with a cracked mirror, sighing, "Alas, even glass cannot hold together what men have torn asunder." The dig at the kingdom's crumbling alliances was obvious, but because the insult came veiled as a melancholy joke, the duke could only grit his teeth and reward the jester's cleverness. Others used puppets to reenact scandals or juggled goblets while accidentally spilling wine on the most corrupt nobles' laps. Every gag was a gamble, walking the line between revelation and retribution. But the risks were deadly serious. For every ruler who appreciated the jester's wit, another saw only treason. In 1582, the Spanish jester Borra was flogged for a puppet show implying the king's favorite general was a coward. The French fool Brusquet narrowly escaped hanging after comparing his king's new taxes to milking stones. The line between hero and martyr was thin, a single misjudged audience reaction, one joke that landed too sharp, and the jester's bells might be silenced forever. Yet the best kept playing the game because when it worked, their words could topple corrupt advisors, expose injustices, or even make a tyrant pause. That was the jester's paradox. The court's designated fool often became its most courageous voice, speaking truths disguised as folly to those who needed to hear them most. Even the sharpest jesters sometimes misjudged their mark, and when humor crossed the invisible line into perceived treason, the consequences were brutal. Consider the fate of Archibald Armstrong, court fool to England's King Charles I. Known for his razor tongue, Archibald once compared the king's unpopular tax policies to milking a bull, a joke that landed him not just a beating but permanent exile from court. Then there was the Italian jester Ganella, who barely escaped execution after quipping that his duke's new crown would fit better on a donkey, the punchline. The duke had notoriously large ears. Ganella's life was spared only when he collapsed in mock terror, wailing that he'd seen the devil himself, a distraction so theatrical it turned the duke's fury into bewildered laughter. The difference between a rewarded jibe and a death sentence often boiled down to timing and the ruler's digestion. Historical accounts reveal many courts operated on an unspoken three-strike rule. A jester might get 2 warnings for edgy humor, often in the form of a night in the stocks or a public scolding, but the third offense, that could mean losing a hand, a tongue, or worse. In 1538, the Spanish jester Pedro de Heredia learned this the hard way after one too many jokes about Emperor Charles V's receding hairline. His final quip, "Even the sun sets on empires, sire," earned him a one-way trip to the gallows. Yet some jesters danced along the edge of disaster and lived to joke another day by mastering the art of the tactical retreat. When the French fool Brusquet accused his king of having a heart as hard as the treasury vaults, he instantly followed it with, "No wonder God made you king, only divine hands could polish such diamond resolve." The insult became flattery so fast it left the court dizzy. This wasn't just quick thinking, it was a survival strategy etched into the very fabric of their profession. The smartest jesters kept a mental ledger of every noble's insecurities, ready to pivot from attack to adulation at the first flicker of royal displeasure. What's chilling is how arbitrary the line could be. The same joke that earned one jester a gold coin might get another flogged, all depending on whether the king had won a battle that morning or argued with his queen at breakfast. This unpredictability forced jesters to become keen students of human nature, reading micro-expressions like scribes deciphering ancient texts. A tightened jaw, a twitching finger on a goblet. These were the real punchlines that determined whether their next performance would be met with laughter or a noose. The stakes transformed their comedy into something far darker than mere entertainment. Every laugh was a gamble, every just a potential last word. Yet this constant peril also elevated their craft. The threat of violence meant their humor had to be precision-engineered, layered with enough ambiguity to deny, yet sharp enough to draw blood. It was comedy as high-wire act, performed without a net over a pit of swords. And while we might chuckle at their antics today, we shouldn't forget, behind every jester's grin was someone who knew exactly how thin the ice beneath their feet really was. The smartest jesters weren't just quick with a joke, they were master psychologists who could read a room like a battlefield. One wrong glance, one delayed laugh, and their next performance might be their last. So they developed razor-sharp instincts, learning to pivot from biting satire to fawning praise in the blink of an eye. Take the technique they called honey on the blade, sandwiching a critique between layers of flattery. A jester might bow low to a touchy duke and say, "Your brilliance shines so bright, sire, it's no wonder your tax collectors squint when counting coins." Though truly, even the sun must envy your radiance. The dig at corruption slipped through while the ruler was still basking in the compliment. Others played the fool's defense, shrugging off their own audacity with wide-eyed innocence. "Forgive me, your majesty, my head's so empty, the truth just tumbles out." This wasn't just false modesty, it was a carefully crafted loophole. By leaning into their role as simpletons, they could claim their sharpest barbs were accidental, buying themselves a second chance when tempers flared. A few elite jesters went further, transforming from court clowns to trusted advisors. Will Sommers, Henry VIII's favorite, perfected this balancing act. He'd lounge at the king's feet like a pet, whispering jokes only Henry could hear, some biting, some soothing, all calculated to steer the monarch's moods. When Henry threatened to execute a noble for treason, Sommers interrupted with a mock trial of a roasted chicken, declaring it the only bird dumb enough to cross a king. The absurdity broke Henry's rage, sparing the noble's life. That was the jester's true power. Laughter could halt an execution where pleas failed, but their influence extended beyond palace walls. Jesters became unlikely diplomats, using humor to bridge divides too delicate for formal negotiations. When tensions between France and England peaked, French jester Triboulet was sent as a gift to Henry VIII, a living peace offering wrapped in motley. His jokes about both kings' vanity, two lions, one mirror, no wonder it cracks, eased hostilities where envoys had stalled. Even warring factions would pause when a jester tumbled into negotiations, knowing his antics could buy time for cooler heads to prevail. The most brilliant part, while ambassadors risked their heads for misspoken words, jesters could float trial balloons in the guise of nonsense. A puppet show mocking two stubborn goats butting heads might hint at terms for a truce, with rulers free to consider the idea without losing face. In a world where pride started wars, the court fool's greatest talent was making surrender taste like shared laughter. Jesters didn't just amuse kings, they shaped history's quietest negotiations, turning feast halls into makeshift peace summits. Picture a banquet where two rival dukes, still armored from recent skirmishes, sat stiffly at opposite ends of the table. Enter the jester, somersaulting down the center with a loaf of bread balanced on his nose. "Behold," he'd cry, "the only thing these lands share without a knife." The tension would snap like a bowstring, first shocked silence, then reluctant chuckles. That bread became a prop in a subtle script. By mocking the absurdity of their feud, the jester reframed conflict as folly. This wasn't just clowning, it was high-stakes diplomacy in motley. Monarchs leveraged their fools as deniable messengers, sending them to rival courts with jokes that doubled as olive branches. When England's Henry V considered invading France, his jester traveled ahead, accidentally dropping a satirical ballad about two roosters too vain to stop pecking. The French court laughed, but the underlying message about mutual destruction landed. Unlike formal envoys whose words could spark wars, jesters could float compromises under the cover of buffoonery. Their true genius lay in psychological disarming. A diplomat's ultimatum triggers defenses. A jester's rhyming riddle about the donkey who thought he was a warhorse makes rulers lean in, not lash out. Take the legendary peace brokered between Aragon and Navarre in 1421. Talks had stalled for months until the Aragonese Jester staged a mock duel between two sausages, dubbing them Pride and Stubbornness. As the court howled, he sighed, "At least these links know when to split evenly." The metaphor broke the deadlock. Within weeks, the treaty was signed. Even in defeat, Jesters softened humiliation. After a crushing loss, the Duke of Burgundy's fool presented him with a hollow crown, "For all the kingdoms you've imagined." The dig at his ambition was sharp, but the Duke's laughter signaled the court it was safe to move on. That was the Jester's unspoken power. They could reframe failure as shared folly, letting rulers save face while accepting reality. Behind every pratfall was a calculated risk. These weren't just jokes, they were trial balloons for peace, testing reactions without consequences. When a jester pretended to marry two goblets during a feud over borders, he wasn't just entertaining, he was sketching a map of possible compromise. And because his silly proposal came with a wink, nobles could consider it without losing pride. In a world where kings would rather bleed than apologize, laughter became the safest bridge between enemies, one built by fools, but strong enough to bear the weight of empires. Laughter in medieval courts wasn't just entertainment, it was a psychological lever, expertly pulled by jesters to disarm aggression and rewire the room's emotional circuitry. Think of it like this: when tensions reached a boiling point, a well-timed joke acted as a pressure valve, releasing steam before explosions could happen. Modern studies back this up. Laughter triggers the release of endorphins, those natural stress relievers that soften anger and lower heart rates. In a world where kings held life and death power, a jester's gag could literally shift the chemistry in the room, turning clenched fists into relaxed smiles. This wasn't so different from today's high-pressure workplaces, where a colleague's quip can diffuse a tense meeting. But imagine if that colleague's job was to mock the CEO's bad decisions and still keep their job. Jesters pulled this off by weaponizing cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort we feel when holding conflicting ideas. A king might see that criticism from an advisor, but when the same truth came wrapped in absurdity, say, a jester pretending to crown a chicken as the wisest ruler in the room, the contradiction short-circuited outrage. The brain, confronted with something so ridiculous yet true, often chose laughter over fury. Take the legendary moment when a Spanish jester diffused his king's rage by mirroring the monarch's own tantrum, flailing on the floor, kicking his legs, and wailing like a spoiled child. The court froze, expecting punishment, but the king, confronted with the absurdity of his own behavior, burst out laughing. That was the jester's dark art, holding up a funhouse mirror to power, revealing its flaws without direct confrontation. Their influence stretched far beyond throne rooms. Jesters were medieval influencers, their jokes rippling through taverns and market squares. A rhyme mocking a noble's greed might start as court entertainment, but by week's end, peasants were singing it while working the fields. In an age without social media, the jester's voice carried further than any decree because laughter, unlike laws, travels fast and sticks hard. While bishops preached and knights intimidated, the fool's mockery shaped public opinion one punchline at a time, proving that even in the darkest ages, humor was the ultimate subversive tool. You've probably seen the classic image of the medieval jester, hunched back, goofy grin, tripping over his own feet while bells jingle from his hat. Disney gave us this lovable, bumbling fool, more mascot than mastermind. But peel back the fairy tale veneer, and you'll find a reality far more fascinating. Real court jesters weren't cartoon sidekicks. They were elite performers with the comedic timing of a stand-up comic, the strategic mind of a diplomat, and the survival instincts of a spy. Take Shakespeare's fool's characters like Touchstone from As You Like It or Fest from Twelfth Night. These weren't just comic relief, they were truth-tellers disguised in motley. When Touchstone quips, "The more pity that fools may not speak wisely what wise men do foolishly," he's echoing the real jesters who used humor to expose hypocrisy. Shakespeare knew the deal. The best fools were never just silly. They were mirrors reflecting the absurdity of power back at those who wielded it and those hunchbacks. Mostly myth, historical records describe jesters as agile, sharp-eyed performers. Many were former acrobats or minstrels recruited for their wit, not deformities. The dwarf jesters of legend, a rarity, most were chosen for mental, not physical, oddity. Their folly was performance art, not pathology. Fast forward to today, and you'll spot the jester's DNA in political satirists like Jon Stewart or South Park. They cloak hard truths in punchlines, just as medieval fools did. When a comedian jokes about a politician's blunder, they're playing the same high-stakes game. Make the audience laugh while making them think. The difference: modern satirists won't get flogged for a bad punchline, though some tweets might come close. This legacy reveals a timeless truth: laughter disarms. Whether it's a 16th century fool mocking a king's vanity or a late-night host roasting a president, the dynamic hasn't changed. The jester's costume just got upgraded to a suit and a YouTube channel. So next time you see a clown in a storybook, remember, the real fools of history were never just laughing. They were teaching us how to listen. Strip away the velvet robes and jingling hats, and you'll find today's satirists operating with the same playbook as medieval jesters, just with fewer risk of beheadings. Think about it. When Jon Stewart dissects political hypocrisy with a raised eyebrow and a perfectly timed punchline, he's wielding the same weapon court fools used to puncture royal egos. Or consider Banksy's graffiti, where a shredded painting or a balloon-floating girl delivers biting commentary without a single word. These modern tricksters might trade bells for viral tweets, but their mission hasn't changed: to make power squirm under the spotlight of laughter. Yet the stakes, while less lethal, still carry weight. Medieval jesters risked the dungeon. Today's satirists dance with lawsuits, censorship, or algorithmic exile. A cartoonist like Charlie Hebdo faces threats for caricatures, while meme creators get shadow banned for mocking politicians. The tools of suppression have evolved. No one's losing their head over a late-night monologue, but the tension remains. Humor still unsettles those in charge, and those who wield it walk a tightrope. Take China's grass mud horse meme, a coded protest against censorship that spread like wildfire until authorities scrubbed it from the internet. The jester's old trick, hiding truth in absurdity, now plays out on global digital stages. What's fascinating is how little the tactics have shifted. Like medieval fools using puppet shows to mock kings, modern satirists cloak critique in layers of irony. A South Park episode portraying world leaders as maniacal toddlers hits the same nerve as a jester pantomiming a lion with a toothache. Both rely on the audience's willingness to connect the dots, to see the real-world parallel beneath the exaggeration. And just as jesters played the fool to avoid repercussions, today's comedians shrug and say, "It's just a joke," when backlash erupts. But here's the twist: while jesters performed for a handful of nobles, today's satirists broadcast to millions. A viral meme can topple a CEO faster than a jester's quip ever unsettled a king. That reach comes with new vulnerabilities, though. Where a medieval fool might face one ruler's wrath, modern satirists navigate minefields of cancel culture, corporate sponsors, and geopolitical sensitivities. The court got bigger, and so did the targets on their backs, which raises the question: are we really freer to laugh at power now? A jest could lose his tongue for mocking the crown, but at least the rules were clear. Today's satirists grapple with invisible lines, algorithms that silence, advertisers that flee, platforms that flag. The dungeons are digital, but they're just as effective at muffling dissent. This brings us to an overlooked chapter of the Jester's legacy, who got to wear the motley. For centuries, court fools were almost exclusively men, but hidden in the margins are stories of women who wielded humor as stealth weapons. From the sharp-tongued maidens of French courts to the nomadic actresses of Italian troops, these women turned societal expectations into comedic ammunition. They couldn't just openly, so they mastered the art of the backhanded compliment or the accidental slip of the tongue. A serving girl might clumsily spill wine on a nobleman's lap while sighing, "Oh, how I tremble before your greatness," delivering an insult wrapped in performative frailty. The parallels to modern female comedians are striking. Think of Tina Fey's razor-sharp impersonations or Samantha Bee's blistering monologues. Like those medieval women, they've had to carve space in a field that wasn't built for them. The difference: today's funny women don't need to hide behind spilled goblets. They're center stage, microphones in hand, proving that humor's power never belonged to any one gender. It just took centuries for the rest of the world to catch up. History books love to paint jesters as bawdy men in patchwork coats, but hidden in the margins are stories of women who turned the court's laughter into a weapon. None more fascinating than Mathurine de Valois, the razor-tongued fool of French King Henry IV. While male jesters rollicked in the spotlight, Mathurine mastered a different art, using sexism as her camouflage. She'd flutter her lashes and play the silly girl, sighing things like, "Oh sire, forgive my feeble mind. I can't fathom why your tax collectors need 3 palaces when one would suffice." The court dismissed her as harmless until the barb landed. Female fools faced a double edge. Their humor had to cut deep enough to matter, but not so deep it shattered the illusion of feminine innocence. Some, like the Italian Jester Gonetta, leaned into stereotypes, performing as the drunken harlot who slurred truths about corrupt priests between hiccups. Others, like the Moorish fool Zayda in Spanish courts, played exotic naïfs, innocently comparing Christian nobles to greedy sultans from her homeland. Their survival depended on this delicate dance, letting powerful men pat themselves on the back for tolerating a woman's chatter while smuggling critiques through the side door. Why were female jesters so rare? Simple. Most courts saw wit as a masculine trait. A man could mock a king and be called bold. A woman doing the same risked being branded a witch. Records suggest only 1 in 20 jesters were women, often hired as novelties or foolish maidens to amuse queens, but the smartest monarchs recognized their value. Catherine de Medici kept a trio of female fools who performed ribald songs, ostensibly for entertainment, but their lyrics conveniently exposed courtiers' scandals. Elizabeth I's unofficial jester, a quick-witted laundress named Jane, would accidentally spill gossip while folding linens, letting the queen gather intelligence under the guise of scolding her clumsy servant. Their tools differed from male jesters too. Where men might brandish slapstick or fart jokes, women wielded sewing needles as props, mending torn tapestries while quipping about stitching the realm back together. They'd serve spiced wine, joking about sweetening bitter policies, or play chess badly while lamenting how pawns always die for kings. Even their costumes subverted expectations. Mathurine wore elaborate gowns half in mockery, half in defiance, proving a woman could be both elegant and outrageous. The cruel irony: while history remembers male jesters like Triboulet and Will Sommers, most female fools were erased from records, their names surviving only in vague mentions like the Duchess's Droll or the Spanish Queen's Merry Wench. Yet their legacy lingers in every female comedian who turns stereotypes into punchlines, every satirist who disarms with a smile. They remind us that sometimes the quietest laughter carries the sharpest truth. A jester's prop wasn't just a toy, it was a loaded weapon disguised as nonsense. Take the Marot, that iconic wooden doll on a stick, clutched in so many medieval illustrations. At first glance, it looked like a child's plaything, but tilted just right, and the caricatured face might resemble the king's finance minister, its exaggerated frown mirroring his latest unpopular tax decree. The jester would waggle it mockingly while chirping, "Oh dear, even my little friend thinks your policies are wooden." The court would roar, the minister would fume, yet no one could punish a man for talking to a doll. Then there were the inflated animal bladders swung like slapstick clubs. Their squeaky thwacks against noblemen's backsides weren't just physical comedy, they were class commentary in action. When a jester bonked a baron known for hoarding grain during a famine, the absurd sound effect turned shame into theater. Even the humblest peasant watching from the gallery understood. That squeal was the voice of the starving finally striking back. Costumes worked the same alchemy. Those patchwork robes weren't just colorful rags, they were walking metaphors. Each mismatched fabric scrap whispered of a kingdom stitched together from unequal parts, while the jingling bells served as constant reminders that the fool was both entertainer and alarm bell. And the hats, oh, the hats were masterstrokes. A donkey-eared cap might accidentally flop over a bishop's portrait during a sermon about vanity, while a crown-shaped jester's hood, slightly askew, teased the very idea of inherited power. But puppets were their nuclear option. With a carved wooden duke and a squeaky-voiced jester, an entire corruption scandal could be reenacted as harmless farce. One infamous performance in 15th century Florence featured a puppet king demanding his wooden subjects breathe gold until they collapsed, a none too subtle dig at the Medici tax policies. The real duke, sitting in the front row, had two choices: laugh and seem magnanimous, or protest and confirm the parody's accuracy. He chose laughter, but the crowd's murmurs lingered long after the puppets were packed away. Even their musical instruments doubled as dissent. A lute strummed with "The Ballad of the Greedy Badger" might chronicle a noble's land grabs, while a recorder played deliberately off-key during a general's boastful war story could undercut his glory. Every prop, every costume piece, every discordant note was a calculated risk, a way to say the unsayable while keeping the fool's grin firmly in place. Because when your critic wears bells and holds a pig scepter, punishing him only proves his point. The most dangerous weapon in a jester's arsenal wasn't a barbed quip or a pointed puppet show, it was a hummable tune. Imagine a crowded tavern where a minstrel strums a jaunty melody about the fox in the henhouse, and soon every drinker is belting the chorus. By morning, merchants sing it in the marketplace. By week's end, soldiers chanted marching to war. What rulers dismissed as peasant entertainment became the medieval equivalent of a protest anthem, carrying dissent on the wings of a catchy refrain. Surviving manuscripts reveal how sly these songs could be. One 15th century lyric from Burgundy describes a priest selling salvation like cabbages at market. 3 coins buys your mother's soul, 5 gets your uncle too, but haggle well, good Christian folk, for God gives bulk discounts too. Set to a bouncy drinking tune, it spread faster than the plague, mocking church indulgences while the clergy fumed helplessly. Another, performed by German jesters, chronicled a nobleman so obese he required 4 horses to carry his dinner, a none too subtle jab at tax collectors growing fat on peasant labor. Dances amplified the message through movement. A popular routine called the Chancellor's Stumble featured performers tripping over invisible bags of gold, their exaggerated pratfalls parodying corrupt officials. In Spain, jesters invented the bishop's jig, where dancers mimicked clutching their robes to flee imaginary demons, a clear dig at clerical hypocrisy. These weren't just entertainments, they were satirical blueprints, teaching audiences to recognize abuse through laughter. The establishment fought back with bans. King Henry VIII famously outlawed the melody, "Green grow the rushes, oh," after jesters rewrote it as "Green grow the king's purses," chronicling his dwindling treasury and many wives. In France, singing "The Miller's Daughter" became punishable by flogging, not because it was lewd, but because its verses accused millers, a metaphor for tax agents, of stealing grain. Authorities quickly learned what modern dictators know. Nothing terrifies power like a tune everyone can remember, but the real genius lay in collaboration. Jesters formed secret networks with minstrels, passing censored lyrics along trade routes like Samizdat pamphlets. Monks sympathetic to reform would hide coded songs in hymn books, while tavern keepers became de facto broadcasters, ensuring new verses reached the right ears. This underground web turned local jokes into regional movements, proving that when truth wears motley and rides a melody, even the heaviest boots can't stamp it out. The alliances ran deeper than music. Some jesters doubled as couriers for rebel groups, their traveling privileges making them ideal message bearers. A famous case involved the fool Pietro de Folli, who smuggled plans for a bread riot inside his hollow juggling clubs. Others, like the enigmatic Brother Bell in Italy, used pilgrimages as cover to coordinate between dissident factions. Their immunity as entertainers gave them access to castles and cottages alike, making them the perfect bridge between angry peasants and reform-minded nobles. What emerges is a shadow history of dissent, written not in manifestos but in doggerel verse and exaggerated dance steps. These weren't just court clowns, they were the meme warriors of their day, weaponizing virality centuries before social media. And while we'll never know how many uprisings began with a jester's wink and a strategically sung chorus, one thing's certain: when those first notes rang out, the powerful heard more than music. They heard the unmistakable sound of their own walls cracking. Behind the laughter and jingling bells, many jesters operated in the shadows as key players in underground resistance networks. Their unique position, able to move freely between castles, taverns, and peasant gatherings, made them ideal intelligence gatherers and message carriers. Take the case of Klaus the Grinner, a Bavarian jester who accidentally performed a rhyming game in a rebel-held village, each verse secretly confirming the location of royal troops. Or the Spanish fool Pepe el Roto, whose puppet shows used colored ribbons to signal which noble households were weakest to attack. These weren't isolated incidents. Jesters formed a loose but effective information web, trading secrets under the guise of entertainment. The infamous Fools' Guild, whispered about in tavern tales, never existed as a formal organization, but covert collaborations were very real. In 1486, French jester Pierre de Provence was caught carrying rebel messages hidden in his hollowed-out juggling pins. Under torture, he revealed nothing, but his execution sparked riots, proving how deeply these entertainers were woven into dissent. Other jesters used performance rituals to pass intelligence. A particular hat tilt might warn of spies in the crowd, while a nonsense song's refrain could encode meeting times. One chilling example comes from the German Peasants' War. Jester Hans Moltasch famously interrupted a count's banquet with a riddle: "What's black and white and red all over?" "A village after your soldiers ride through." The court laughed, but rebels listening outside recognized the coded alert. The count's forces would wear black and white livery and attack at dawn, red signaling bloodshed. By morning, the village was evacuated. The risks were unimaginable. a jester caught aiding rebels faced methods far worse than mere execution, breaking wheels, tongue removal, or being forced to perform their own torture as entertainment. Yet many took the gamble. Some, like Italian fool Arlecchino the Cunning, even trained rebel leaders in jester techniques, teaching them to disguise strategy sessions as drunken revels. Others exploited superstition. The Polish jester Stanczyk convinced guards he was cursing their weapons by juggling them, secretly dulling blades before battles. This hidden war had an unexpected side effect. It transformed jesters into folk heroes. Ballads celebrated figures like Red Jack, an English jester who smuggled starving children into castle kitchens by disguising them as performing dwarves. Woodcuts depicted fools leading peasant armies with laughter instead of swords. Even the church grudgingly acknowledged their spiritual role, with some monasteries secretly sheltering fugitive jesters as God's own truth-tellers. Which raises a tantalizing question. Did these mockers of kings become the closest thing medieval Europe had to saints? The answer lies in a surprising place, not in battlefields or throne rooms, but in the quiet chapels where fools and faith unexpectedly intertwined. In the flickering candlelight of medieval chapels, an unexpected figure often knelt beside bishops and kings, the court jester, his bells silent for once. This was the great paradox of the fool, condemned as a blasphemer one day, revered as a holy vessel the next. Across Europe, cultures wrestled with the idea that these profane jesters might be touched by the divine. Russian Orthodox tradition embraced holy fools, barefoot wanderers like Saint Basil the Blessed, who hurled rocks at houses of the virtuous and kissed the walls of brothels, startling acts believed to reveal hidden sins. Byzantium's solos would eat raw meat during Lent or howl like dogs in church, their apparent madness seen as divine madness, stripping away worldly pretense. Yet in the same breath, jesters skewered religious hypocrisy with ruthless precision. Records from the Vatican itself describe a papal fool staging a mock mass where the holy water was wine and the host a roasted chicken. In England, a jester interrupted a bishop's sermon on chastity by releasing a pair of amorous squirrels from his sleeves, quipping, "Even beasts know lust needs no Latin." These weren't just pranks, they were theological critiques in motley. When the church sold indulgences, jesters performed absolution auctions, offering to forgive sins for progressively smaller coins until shouting, "A halfpenny buys paradise." God must be bankrupt. The tension between sacred and profane peaked during Carnival, those wild days before Lent when fools briefly became kings. In a dizzying inversion of order, a jester might be crowned Pope of Fools, presiding over processions where donkeys wore mitres and drunkards recited scripture backward. The clergy largely tolerated, even participated in these antics, recognizing them as necessary pressure valves. As one chronicler noted, "Let men play at divinity for a day, lest they challenge it in earnest." Literature immortalized this duality. Shakespeare's fools drop spiritual wisdom between jibes touchstone. In As You Like It muses that, "The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool," echoing Ecclesiastes. Dostoevsky's The Idiot resurrects the holy fool archetype in Prince Mishkin, whose childlike honesty exposes societal corruption. Even modern fantasy carries the torch toll. Keane's jester-like tooks are eccentric but prescient, while A Song of Ice and Fire's Patchface spews eerie prophecies in nursery rhymes. What emerges is a portrait of the jester as humanity's shadow conscience, too impious to be priests, too insightful to be mere clowns. They lived in the liminal space between heaven and earth, using laughter to ask the most dangerous question of all, if divine truth might sometimes wear a cockeyed grin. From Chaucer's riotous miller to George R.R. Martin's eerie patchface, literature has immortalized jesters as truth-tellers cloaked in chaos. The Canterbury Tales jangling Absalom isn't just comic relief. He's the medieval everyman, using wit to navigate a world where brute strength and piety dominate. His failed courtship of Alison mirrors the historical jester's plight. Even the cleverest fool can overplay his hand. Fast forward to Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, and Patchface's seemingly nonsensical rhymes, Under the Sea, The Birds Have Scales, echo the coded warnings real jesters use to predict political storms. What fiction grasps is the fool's dual nature, buffoon and oracle rolled into one. Shakespeare elevated this duality to high art. His jesters aren't just witty, they're the play's moral compasses. Fest in Twelfth Night wraps existential musings in drinking songs. Journeys end in lovers meeting, every wise man's son doth know. The line lands as a joke, but its melancholy truth lingers like smoke. Then there's King Lear's unnamed fool, whose riddles, thou shouldst not have been old till thou hadst been wise, cut deeper than any sword. These characters vanish when their work is done, as if SHAKESPERRE, Chinese letter ED truth-tellers can't survive in a world that stops listening. Folklore teems with fools outsmarting power. German tales tell of Till Eulenspiegel, who tricks a bishop into blessing a barrel of drunkards as holy men. Russian legends feature Ivan the Fool, whose apparent idiocy lets him defeat witches and tsars alike. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were wish fulfillment for oppressed audiences. When a peasant heard how a simpleton outwitted the devil with a riddle, it whispered, "You too can fight back." This admiration bled into ballads memorializing real jesters. The Scottish ballad of Wee Jockey Fife recounts how a dwarf jester saved a queen by hiding her in his oversized hat, a metaphor for how society underestimated these small-statured performers. Spanish romances celebrate Pedro de Urdimalas, a trickster jester who allegedly stole a king's crown, just to see if it fit better on a donkey. Such tales crystallized the public's love for underdogs who humbled the high and mighty. Yet as Europe marched toward modernity, the jester's role faded. The rise of professional theaters made court fools seem quaint. Enlightenment thinkers dismissed them as relics of superstition. By 1750, most royal courts had traded motley-clad truth-tellers for sycophantic gentlemen of the chamber. The last known British court jester, Dickie Pierce, died in 1720, his epitaph reading, "Here lies the King of Fools." It was a fitting epitaph for an era that no longer had patience for wisdom wrapped in laughter. But something curious happened as jesters vanished from palaces. They exploded in popular culture. Victorian operettas revived them as romantic heroes. Dickens gave us whimsical eccentrics like Mr. Wopsle. Even children's literature got in on the act. The Mad Hatter's Tea Party is pure jester logic, where nonsense reveals deeper sanity. Their ghosts linger in every stand-up comic skewering politicians and every meme exposing hypocrisy. Because while the jester's costume may have faded, humanity's need for truth disguised as folly hasn't changed one bit. The golden age of jesters didn't end with a bang, but with a slow, quiet squeeze like a courtier's grip tightening around a wine goblet. By the 17th century, Europe's monarchs had grown weary of being mocked, even by their own fools. The rise of absolute power meant kings no longer saw jesters as charming truth-tellers, but as liabilities. Why tolerate a clown's jabs when you could command silence? Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, famously banished his last jester after a joke about his wig's size hit too close to home. The message was clear: the age of laughter as a sanctioned weapon was over. Print culture delivered the final blow. Where once a jester's satire lived and died in the moment, the printing press immortalized every barb. A quip that might have earned a chuckle in the throne room could now be reproduced in pamphlets and distributed to the masses. Suddenly, a fool's joke wasn't just entertainment, it was potential propaganda. In 1598, English jester Will Kemp learned this the hard way when his improvised rhyme about Queen Elizabeth's parsimonious purse appeared in a broadside. The Queen, less amused in print than in person, had him whipped. The written word had stripped jesters of their greatest shield, deniability. Enlightenment thinkers finished what monarchs started. Philosophers like Voltaire mocked court fools as grotesque holdovers from the age of credulity. To intellectuals preaching reason, the jester's antics seemed childish, a relic of the dark times they were so eager to escape. Even the church turned its back, declaring holy fools unseemly in an era of religious reform. The very institutions that once protected jesters now found them embarrassing, like a drunk uncle at a salon gathering. Yet some fools went down swinging. The last recorded jester of the Holy Roman Empire, one Kunz von der Rosen, reportedly greeted his dismissal by bowing deeply and declaring, "At least I leave before the audience grows wise enough to stop applauding." In Denmark, clown Peder Pars staged a mock funeral for his own profession, parading a tiny coffin labeled "Common Sense" through Copenhagen. Their defiance highlights the tragic irony. The more enlightened Europe became, the less room it had for those who'd once spoken truth to power under the cover of laughter. But jesters never truly vanished, they just shed their motley. The same biting wit migrated to coffeehouse pamphleteers, political cartoonists, and eventually late-night TV hosts. What rulers couldn't stamp out was the human need for satire, the itch to prick pomposity wherever it blooms. Today's comedians might not wear bells, but when they roast presidents or parody billionaires, they're following a playbook written in castle courtyards centuries ago. The costumes changed, but the game remains the same. Make them laugh while you make them think, and maybe, just maybe, keep your head in the process. The next time you tell someone not to shoot the messenger, you're channeling the protective cloak of medieval jesters, a phrase born from their unique license to deliver harsh truths without losing their heads. Our everyday speech is littered with these linguistic fossils from the fool's golden age. Take Motley Crue, originally mocking the jester's patchwork costume, but now embracing any ragtag group of rebels. Or Fool's Errand, recalling the pointless tasks nobles assigned jesters to test their wit, like sending them to fetch yesterday's sunshine or a pint of dragon's tears. Even the term court jester as an insult carries the sting of history, twisting what was once a position of cunning into a slur for cluelessness. Britain's parliament quietly keeps the tradition alive with the parliamentary fool, an unofficial role played by backbenchers who roast leadership through carefully crafted humor. Much like their medieval predecessors, these modern jesters walk a tightrope. One recent holder of the title quipped during Brexit debates, "We've sent so many fact-finding missions to Brussels, they ought to give us EU frequent flyer miles." The laughter diffused tension while spotlighting bureaucratic absurdity. But the jester's true legacy thrives in protest movements worldwide. Activists adopt their tactics, using satire as a shield. Think of Pussy Riot's punk prayer performances or the Yes Men's corporate parodies. Like fools skewering kings with puppet shows, today's satirists stage elaborate hoaxes to expose corruption. When protesters in Hong Kong dressed as characters from Les Miserables during demonstrations, they weren't just making a musical reference, they were deploying the jester's ancient playbook, where costumes and irony become armor against oppression. Language preserves what history books often overlook. Every time we call someone the fool who speaks truth, or dismiss an idea as jangling like a jester's bells, we're keeping alive a tradition where laughter wasn't just entertainment, It was the sharpest tool in the box for changing minds without drawing swords. The echoes of those motley-clad truth-tellers remind us that sometimes the most revolutionary act isn't a shout, but a perfectly timed punchline. When a group like the Yes Men crashes a corporate conference pretending to be Dow Chemical spokesmen only to apologize for the Bhopal disaster on live TV, they're not just pulling a prank. They're wielding the exact same weapon medieval jesters used, the calculated absurdity that forces power to reveal its own hypocrisy. The parallels are uncanny. Where a 15th century fool might present his king with a hollow scepter to mock empty authority, modern activists hand out fake awards like the Corporate Fraud of the Year trophy to oil executives. The tools have upgraded from pig bladders to Photoshop, but the strategy remains identical. Wrap the truth in laughter so potent, the powerful can't retaliate without looking foolish themselves. Consider the court jesters' distant cousins, the protest clowns who swarm political rallies with oversized puppets and satirical chants. Like their medieval predecessors, these activists use exaggerated costumes as both shield and spotlight. When Italian clown block protesters faced riot police at G8 summits, their rainbow wigs and rubber chickens turned brutal crackdowns into surreal theater. The moment an officer in body armor swings at a performer juggling foam batons, the spectacle exposes who the real aggressor is, just as a jester's pantomime of a greedy noble once did. Humor's real superpower in activism, accessibility. A dense policy report might gather dust, but a viral meme mocking that same policy, like Anonymous projecting "lol" onto the side of oppressive government buildings, reaches millions instantly. Medieval jesters understood this instinctively. Their rhyming couplets about tax corruption spread faster through taverns than any parchment decree because laughter is contagious in ways anger rarely is. Modern studies confirm this. Psychology experiments show people retain satirical news better than straight reporting and are more likely to share it. That's why groups like the Barbie Liberation Organization surgically swapped voice boxes of dolls to make Barbie growl. Deadly force is authorized, while G.I. Joe chirped, "Let's go shopping." The absurdity made critiques of gender stereotypes unforgettable, which raises the provocative question, can an Instagram meme really fell a modern empire like a jester's well-placed quip once toppled favor at court? The evidence suggests yes, with caveats. When Tunisian protesters in 2010 turned their dictator's speeches into auto-tuned remixes, the videos didn't just mock Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, they shattered the fear keeping his regime upright. But there's a crucial difference. Medieval fools had captive audiences in royal courts, while today's satirists battle algorithmic suppression and information overload. A jester's joke about the king's baldness might linger for weeks in a gossip-starved court, but a brilliant hashtag today can vanish beneath the next outrage in minutes. Neuroscience helps explain why this ancient tactic still works. fMRI scans reveal that humor activates the brain's reward pathways while dampening activity in the amygdala, the fear center. Essentially, laughter chemically disarms us, creating a brief window where criticism can slip past our defenses. Jesters exploited this instinctively when they'd have nobles roaring at jokes about the chancellor's invisible cloak of competence before realizing they'd just tacitly acknowledged his incompetence. Modern activists replicate this by embedding critiques in parody accounts or satirical commercials like the infamous tax dodge ad campaign that framed offshore banking as an extreme sport. The risks, however, have evolved. Where a medieval fool might lose his tongue for insubordination, today's satirists face slap lawsuits, doxing, or platform bans. Yet the smartest continue borrowing from the jester's playbook, using irony as legal armor. When a Russian activist was fined for discrediting the military, she showed up court dressed as a Renaissance fool, quoting Pushkin's line about truth speaking through the mouth of babes and madmen. The case was dismissed, not because the judge appreciated literary references, but because punishing someone in a jingle hat would have made headlines. That's the enduring lesson. Make your oppressor look ridiculous, and you strip them of their most potent weapon, fear. Perhaps the most telling evolution is how marginalized groups have reclaimed the jester's mantle. Just as female fools like Mathurine used gendered stereotypes as camouflage, LGBTQ+ activists deploy camp humor to disarm homophobia from the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence's nun dragged to Ukraine's come out of the closet tractor parades mocking Putin's machismo. Their brilliance lies in the same duality medieval jesters mastered. The closer you look, the harder it becomes to tell whether you're witnessing comedy or revolution. And that uncertainty, whether in a Tudor palace or a Twitter thread, is where real change begins. Ever wonder why a well-timed joke can make even the most stubborn person reconsider their views? Science has cracked the code behind why jesters and modern satirists get away with saying what no one else can. Studies in cognitive psychology reveal that laughter literally rewires our brains, lowering the drawbridge to critical thinking. When researchers at Ohio State University showed participants political satire like The Daily Show, they found viewers not only remembered the facts better than those who watched straight news, they were also more likely to question their own biases. The punchline: humor bypasses our defenses like a Trojan horse, smuggling in challenging ideas while our guard is down. Neuroscientists trace this back to a chemical cocktail released during laughter. Dopamine floods our system, creating a pleasurable buzz that makes us more receptive to new information. At the same time, cortisol, the stress hormone that triggers defensive reactions, takes a nosedive. Medieval jesters exploited this biological loophole instinctively. When a fool mocked a king's failed war by juggling empty coffers and quipping, "Behold the fruits of victory." The court's laughter wasn't just amusement, it was a neurological truce. For those few seconds of mirth, even the monarch's brain became momentarily open to self-reflection. Fast forward to modern dictatorships, and the same principles hold. North Korea's regime reportedly employs a 3,000-strong cyber unit solely to hunt down memes mocking Kim Jong-un. Why? Because a 2021 Stanford study found that citizens who shared political jokes were 3 times more likely to later engage in dissent. Tyrants grasp what medieval kings knew: let people laugh at you today, and tomorrow they might stop fearing you. But the most fascinating parallel lies in brain scans. fMRI research comparing responses to medieval-style puppet shows and Saturday Night Live sketches revealed identical activation patterns in the prefrontal cortex, the region tied to insight and perspective-taking. Whether it's a 16th-century jester pantomiming corrupt bishops or John Oliver dissecting corporate greed, subversive humor lights up the same mental pathways. Our hardware hasn't upgraded in 500 years. We're still running on comedy's original operating system. Yet for all its power, humor has a fragile tipping point. Cross an invisible line and laughter curdles into hostility, a lesson jesters learned the hard way when their 3-strike rule became a noose. Modern comedians face similar pitfalls. A 2023 Cambridge analysis of failed political jokes found that attempts to satirize extremism often backfire, reinforcing the beliefs they mock. The difference between a truth bomb and a dud: timing, tone, and most crucially, whether the audience feels included in the laugh rather than targeted by it. This delicate balance explains why authoritarian regimes still execute satirists while democracies debate cancel culture. The instinct to silence mockers isn't medieval cruelty, it's primal recognition that laughter dissolves fear. And when fear vanishes, so does unchecked power. So the next time you chuckle at a viral meme skewering a politician, remember, you're not just scrolling mindlessly. You're participating in an ancient neurological rebellion, one where the right joke at the right moment can topple empires without drawing a single sword. Even the sharpest jesters occasionally tripped over their own tongues, sometimes with fatal consequences. Take the infamous case of Markov, the Danish fool who dared to quip about Queen Margaret's childlessness at a state banquet. "Your Majesty's womb must be as barren as your tax coffers," he joked, expecting the usual ripple of nervous laughter. Instead, the room turned to ice. The Queen, who'd spent years battling whispers about her infertility, didn't just banish Markov, she ordered his tongue nailed to the castle gates as a warning. His mistake, misreading the difference between a ruler's public persona and their private pain. Jesters walked a knife's edge. The same joke that earned applause one day could spell doom the next, depending on the monarch's mood, the political climate, or even the weather. Cultural blind spots proved equally deadly. In 1532, Portuguese jester Duarte de Brito performed a rollicking puppet show mocking Ottoman customs for King John III's court. What he didn't realize, the king's beloved wife, Catherine of Austria, had been raised with deep respect for Ottoman traditions. Her furious intervention got Duarte sentenced to the galleys, a harsh lesson in knowing your audience's hidden sensitivities. Other jesters fell victim to poor timing, like the Burgundian fool who joked about empty treasuries moments after his duke returned from a disastrous war. The punchline arrived so close to the trauma that it struck as cruelty, not comedy. Modern comedians face eerily similar pitfalls. Just as jesters navigated the whims of monarchs, today's entertainers must decode the ever-shifting rules of political correctness and cancel culture. Take the uproar over a 2019 Netflix special where a comedian's edgy joke about a sensitive social issue sparked global backlash and boycotts. Like Markov's fatal quip, the bit wasn't just deemed unfunny, it was seen as crossing an invisible line of acceptable targets. The key difference, instead of losing his tongue, the comedian lost streaming revenue and reputation. What separates a career-ending gaffe from a risky joke that lands? Context is everything. Medieval jesters survived by mastering the three layers rule, wrapping criticism in absurdity, then flattery, then absurdity again. A wise fool might mock a king's military defeat by first praising his noble chin, then comparing the battle to a heroic hedgehog fighting a landslide, and finally bowing so low his hat fell off. The technique gave rulers an out. They could choose to laugh at the physical comedy while ignoring the barb. Today's comedians use similar deflection tactics, like prefacing a controversial take with "don't cancel me, but," or following it with exaggerated self-deprecation. Yet some lines remain uncrossable. Historical records mention at least 12 jesters executed for jokes about a ruler's legitimacy, a medieval parallel to modern taboos around identity-based humor. The French fool Gros Guillaume learned this the hard way when he jokingly referred to King Louis XIII as the spare who became the heir after his brother's death. The remark played on court gossip about Louis being a sickly second son, unfit for the throne. Guillaume's head adorned a pike by sundown. Centuries later, a British comedian's on-air quip about a royal's paternity scandal sparked similar outrage, proving some topics stay radioactive across eras. The wisest humorists then and now understand that laughter isn't just about the joke, but the space between the joke and the listener's dignity. A 15th century manual for court fools put it bluntly: mock the crown, but never the head wearing it. Modern improvs, yes, and rule echoes this ancient wisdom, teaching performers to build on ideas rather than demolish them. When a jester teased Henry VIII about his weight, he added, "But what is a kingdom without a mountain at its center?" The save turned insult into homage. Similarly, a 2022 stand-up special went viral when a comedian roasted corporate greed, then pivoted to praising small businesses balancing critique with hope. Harnessing humor's power without triggering its backlash requires the same skills today's diplomats use: emotional intelligence, situational awareness, and a finely tuned radar for pain points. The jesters who thrived weren't just quick with a joke, they were master psychologists who knew when to push, when to pivot, and when to prostrate themselves with an exaggerated, "Alas, my tiny brain fails me again." Their modern equivalents succeed by blending bravery with empathy, understanding that the best satire punches up without knocking the audience down. After all, the goal was never just to provoke laughter, but to make sure you lived to provoke another day. The jester's playbook wasn't scribbled on parchment. It was etched in survival instincts, a set of unspoken rules honed over centuries of walking the razor's edge between truth and treason. First among them, know your audience like the back of your motley sleeve. A wise fool could read a monarch's twitch or a noble's forced smile the way a sailor reads the wind. Take the case of Rigolto, the infamous jester of Mantua, who kept 2 sets of jokes in his repertoire: bawdy tales for drunken feast nights, sly parables for sober council meetings. His secret: he tracked lunar cycles, knowing the Duke's moods darkened with the moon. Modern workplaces demand the same radar. Crack a joke about bureaucracy during a casual coffee chat, and you're the office hero. Deliver it in a tense budget meeting, and you're the scapegoat. Then came the golden rule: disguise your dagger in feathers. Medieval jesters perfected the art of the non-joke joke, a criticism wrapped so thick in absurdity, the target couldn't react without admitting they understood the dig. When French fool Brusquet wanted to mock his king's obsession with hunting, he didn't rant about neglected state affairs. Instead, he pranced through court with a dead rabbit, wailing, "Sire, your prey sends word they've surrendered." Now might you govern your human subjects. The sheer ridiculousness made the king roar with laughter before quietly cancelling his next hunting trip. Today's equivalent, the co-worker who, innocently, suggests printing the new policy on biodegradable paper since it'll be obsolete by lunch. The message lands without fingerprints. But the most crucial lesson was the exit strategy. Every seasoned jester kept a mental library of retreat, self-deprecating one-liners, sudden pratfalls, or even feigned stupidity to diffuse tension. Will Summers, faced with Henry VIII's thunderous glare after a risky quip, would dramatically clutch his chest and declare, "God's teeth, my wits run dry, someone fetch this poor fool a refill." The diversion gave the king an out to laugh instead of lash out. Modern negotiators use similar tactics. Ever seen a manager pause after a blunt observation, then grin and add, "But what do I know? I still can't work the coffee machine." That's not insecurity, it's a calculated disarmament, straight from the jester's handbook. The real genius lay in balancing truth with survivability. Jesters understood that unvarnished honesty got you banished, but sycophancy made you irrelevant. Their solution: the honey-coated thorn, a compliment laced with critique. When Elizabeth I's jester quipped, "Your Majesty's wisdom shines so bright, it's a wonder your ministers don't wear shades," she got the dig at her overbearing advisors while basking in the flattery. Contemporary leaders might try this at their next board meeting. Our growth strategy's as ambitious as Elon's Twitter takeover. Let's just hope the execution's smoother. Praise the vision, nudge the execution, and live to joke another day. Where can we apply these ancient tricks today? Start with tense workplaces. A well-placed, looks like the printer's rejecting documents again, must have heard about the new policy, can ventilate frustration without targeting individuals. Social media debates thrive on the jester's riddle tactic of framing arguments as playful questions. Instead of, "Your take on climate change is wrong," try, "If a glacier melts in the Arctic and no one's there to hear it, does it still flood coastal cities?" The humor lowers defenses while the point lingers. Yet the deepest lesson history's fools teach us is this: study their failures as closely as their triumphs. For every jester who talked his way out of execution, a dozen vanished into dungeons, their missteps misreading shifting alliances, underestimating personal wounds, or forgetting that even kings have bad days are cautionary tales for today's truth-tellers. The pamphlets of 16th century jesters who pushed too far sit in museum archives beside their severed hand bells, silent testaments to the price of unchecked wit. Which brings us to the rarest artifacts of all the few surviving fools' contracts, scribbled agreements between jesters and their patrons. One, displayed in Berlin's Museum of European Cultures, includes the clause, "The said fool shall have liberty to speak, but not so liberally as to lose his head." That delicate balance between license and limits remains the tightrope every modern satirist, activist, or office joker must walk. Perhaps the most poignant relic is a single cracked bell found in a Parisian dungeon, its clapper removed. The label simply reads, "For the fool who forgot laughter has teeth." These fragments whisper across centuries, reminding us that humor's power comes not from unchecked barbs, but from knowing precisely how deep they can safely cut. Digging through London's mudflats, archaeologists unearthed a small, unassuming bone whistle in 2018, no wider than a thumb, its surface worn smooth by centuries of fingertips. At first glance, it could have belonged to any medieval musician, but the carving gave it away, a tiny, grinning face with one eye winking. This was no ordinary instrument, it was a jester's tool, perhaps clutched by Will Sommers himself as he pranced through Henry VIII's banquets. Blow into it today, and the sound isn't a melodic trill, but a raucous squawk fit for tripping up solemn moments. That's the magic of such relics, they collapse time. Suddenly, these figures we've mythologized as stock characters become startlingly real. You can almost hear the echo of some long-dead fool using this very whistle to punctuate a punchline about the king's latest doomed marriage. Far grander but equally revealing is the carved oak throne in Prague's Lobkovich Palace, its armrest depicting a jester whispering into a ruler's ear. The fool's face is eroded by generations of touch, not from vandalism, but because visitors couldn't resist tracing the contours of history's most intimate power dynamic. What secrets passed between them? The carving freezes a truth often lost in chronicles. Kings didn't just tolerate jesters, they leaned in, yet these surviving artifacts are the exceptions. Jesters left behind fewer traces than armor-clad knights or pious monks because their tools were ephemeral by design. Felt hats disintegrate, inflated pig bladders pop. Even their words, meant to evaporate like laughter, survived only when scribes deigned to record them. Archaeologists face a cruel irony: the very things that made jesters effective, their mobility, their reliance on perishable props, make them ghosts in the material record. A handful of bells from a disintegrating cap in York, a rusted dagger in Avignon inscribed, "Laughter cuts deepest," fragments of a wooden marotte in Florence. These scant remnants hint at a richer world we can only reconstruct through educated guesses. The contrast between relics and fictional portrayals is jarring. Hollywood gives us flamboyant jesters in rainbow silks, but the whistle from London is plain bone, its practicality reflecting a working entertainer's life. The Prog Throne's fool wears simple tights, not the exaggerated motley of storybooks. These artifacts reveal a profession more nuanced than caricature, less courtly clown and more tactical rhetorician with a side gig in physical comedy. Perhaps most poignant is a child's wooden doll found in a Cologne cesspit, its head crudely reshaped into a fool's cap. Some medieval parent, maybe even a former jester, repurposed a broken toy to teach their child the family trade. It's a humble counterpoint to grand throne carvings, reminding us that behind every legendary fool were real people, craftsmen of laughter, who honed their skills in courtyards before they ever performed for kings. These objects don't just humanize jesters, they whisper that humor, even in the darkest ages, wasn't a luxury but a necessity as vital as bread or blade. Hollywood loves to paint jesters as grinning, hunchbacked men in patchwork coats, but history tells a far more complex story. First, the myth of the all-male jester. While records are sparse due to medieval sexism, we know women like Mathurine de Valois wielded satire in French courts, and Italian troupe actresses like Gonetta perfected the art of the backhanded compliment. These women couldn't perform as openly as male fools, so they mastered subtler weapons, accidentally spilling wine while sighing over tax policies or sewing subversive slogans into royal tapestries. Their humor wasn't slapstick but surgical. Then there's the stereotype of the merry fool. Paintings show jesters mid-laugh, but account books reveal a darker reality. The payroll of England's Henry VII lists his jester's salary alongside the court torturers, a telling proximity. Many fools battled depression, their laughter a performance masking despair. The diary of German jester Klaus Narr confesses, "I dance on the grave of my own dignity each noon." Others turn to drink. Tavern bills from Prague show jesters drowning their sorrows after performances. The happiest fool was often the least free. And what about dwarfism? While some rulers kept little people as curiosities, most jesters were hired for mental agility, not physical traits. Portraits of Will Sommers and Triboulet show average-sized men. Their folly was entirely performative. In fact, the Vatican's records praise jesters like Buffon de Bologna for a stature unremarkable, but a tongue like a scalpel. The dwarf jester trope stems from Renaissance freak shows, where nobles exhibited people with disabilities alongside exotic animals, actual court fools. They were more likely to be ex-acrobats or disgraced scholars than individuals with congenital conditions. Don't assume jesters were universally adored, either. Noble diaries bristle with resentment. The Earl of Surrey's private letters complain about Henry VIII's fool, Will Sommers having more ear of the king than his own council. Spanish Duke Alvaro de Luna had his jester whipped for a joke about his mistress, then hired him back days later, proving how indispensable these truth-tellers were, even when despised. Primary sources shatter the myths further. A recently discovered contract from Burgundy stipulates a jester must mock but not madden, jest but not jeer. Another, hidden in Milan's archives, lists required skills: recitation, music, tumbling, and the reading of Latin. These weren't bumbling idiots. They were Renaissance multitaskers with the comedic precision of a stand-up and the survival instincts of a spy. Which brings us to their most overlooked role, wartime operatives. When battles loomed, jesters became stealth assets. Their ability to cross enemy lines under the guise of entertainment made them ideal messengers. During the 100 Years' War, French fool Guillaume Le Fou delivered coded troop movements inside rhyming prophecies. In 1512, a jester's puppet show distracted Swiss mercenaries long enough for Milanese forces to reposition cannon, a tactic later studied by military strategists. These weren't just pranksters in silly hats. They were psychological warfare specialists centuries before the term existed. The truth: jesters were the medieval equivalent of special ops teams, part comedian, part diplomat, part spy. Their real costume wasn't motley, but the perfect camouflage, the illusion of harmlessness that let them operate in plain sight. And that, perhaps, is their greatest legacy, proving that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a sword, but a well-timed punchline. Battlefields weren't just the domain of armored knights, they echoed with the jingling bells of jesters who turned war zones into stages. These motley-clad morale boosters marched alongside armies, not with swords, but with songs sharp enough to cut through fear. Accounts from the 100 Years' War describe French fools perched on supply wagons, belting out raunchy ballads about English archers' misfires, turning pre-battle jitters into roaring laughter. A Swiss mercenary's diary recounts a jester who juggled wineskins during a siege, shouting, "The only thing thirstier than us is their crumbling walls." A bit of psychological warfare that reportedly made defenders hesitate before dumping boiling oil. But their antics weren't just for show. Jesters doubled as medieval espionage agents, exploiting their perceived harmlessness to slip behind enemy lines. The Florentine fool Arlecchino the Sly was famed for entertaining rival camps while memorizing troop positions. Disguised as a drunkard singing off-key love songs, he'd stumbled past sentries, his seemingly nonsensical lyrics encoding details about supply routes. Others, like the Burgundian jester Jacomin, used puppet shows to distract guards while scouts mapped fortifications. Their greatest asset, no one suspected the fool with the lopsided grin was the one stealing their battle plans. When bloodshed gave way to stalemates, jesters became unlikely diplomats. During the brutal Wars of the Roses, a captured English jester named Patch brokered a prisoner exchange by performing a mock trial where he sentenced both sides to share a barrel of ale. The gag broke tensions so effectively that commanders agreed to swap captives, with Patch adding a clause that he'd haunt anyone who reneged with off-key ballads. Similarly, after the Battle of Marignano, a Milanese fool named Ganella halted executions by staging a ridiculous duel between two sausages, declaring, "If we must see links severed, let it be these." The absurdity made both French and Swiss commanders laugh, sparing dozens of lives. The ultimate testament to their power, the Battle of the Spurs in 1513, where a single jest stopped combat before it began. As French and English knights glared across the field, the French king's jester, Triboulet, galloped between the lines on a donkey, backward. "Forgive me, brave sirs," he cried. "I'm fleeing your coming glory so fast I've forgotten which way to point." The sheer audacity made both armies erupt in laughter. Swords lowered, and commanders agreed to a temporary truce, all because a fool reminded them that sometimes the quickest way to disarm an enemy isn't with steel, but with a well-timed punchline. These battlefield jesters proved that humor wasn't just a diversion from war. It was a weapon that could outmaneuver armies. While kings obsessed over tactics and terrain, the fools understood a deeper truth. Morale is the real deciding factor in any conflict. Their legacy lives on in modern military entertainers, from WW2USO shows to comedians touring forward operating bases, proving that even in the darkest hours, laughter remains the most subversive force of all. Centuries after the last court jester hung up his motley, their legacy still echoes in every satirical headline, every protest chant laced with irony, every boardroom joke that smuggles truth into power's inner sanctums. These masters of mirth didn't just survive the Middle Ages, they rewired the very fabric of dissent, proving that laughter could be both scalpel and shield in a world where speaking plainly meant losing your tongue. Their brilliance lay in duality. A jester's pratfall could distract a room while his rhyme exposed corruption. Just as a modern late-night host's punchline about climate change might land between celebrity interviews and suddenly click, the audience thinks differently about policy. Consider how their tactics evolved into today's activism, when protesters dress as clowns to mock authoritarian regimes like Belarus's March of the Naked Kings, where demonstrators wore carnival masks to parody their dictator. They're channeling the same spirit that once made jesters juggle tax coins while winking at starving peasants. Even corporate whistleblowers borrow from the fool's playbook, leaking scandals through parody Twitter accounts or staging absurdist stunts. One employee at a tech giant recently exposed wage gaps by releasing a salary board game, where executives rolled golden dice while cleaners used toothpicks. A move worthy of any medieval jester skewering inequality with props. But the real surprise, jester logic now drives billion-dollar businesses. Silicon Valley celebrates disruptors who play the fool to upend industries, while marketing teams use self-deprecating humor to disarm critics. Think Wendy's roasting competitors on social media like a court fool teasing rival nobles. Even workplace psychology embraces clown principles, training managers to admit mistakes with theatrical flair because, as one Fortune 500 consultant put it, nothing disarms tension like a leader who can laugh at their own blunder. The jester's greatest trick was making humility a weapon, and today's most innovative companies are finally taking notes. Yet for all their influence, jesters would likely scoff at our nostalgia. The same forces that silenced them, censorship, corporate capture of satire, the blurring line between clown and porn, still threaten modern truth-tellers. A viral meme can topple a CEO, but algorithms can vanish it faster than a king's decree burned pamphlets. Stand-ups face outrage mobs instead of executioners, yet the silencing mechanism remains eerily similar. So let's end with the words of Toppled, the French jester who supposedly dodged execution by telling his king, "If you kill the fool, who will remind you that you stink?" His lesson transcends centuries. Humor isn't just entertainment, but oxygen for societies choking on their own pretenses. Whether it's a TikTok skit exposing corruption or a coworker's eye-roll-inducing pun that breaks a tense meeting, we're all inheritors of that motley-clad rebellion. The truth still wears many disguises. It's just traded bells for a podcast mic. Now it's your turn. Who are your favorite modern or historical fools? The tricksters who spoke truth with a grin? A satirist, a prankster aunt, even a meme creator who made you rethink the world? Drop their stories in the comments, and if you've enjoyed this dive into history's most cunning survivors, don't forget to subscribe. After all, the best lessons often come disguised as jokes, and we've got plenty more untold tales where this one came from.